Tonight on Life on the Rock, we have Mallory Smyth from Endow, a video about the dignity of women, and much more. Welcome to Life on the Rock. Tonight our guest is Mallory Smyth. She is the Director of Program Growth for Endow. Endow is the education on the nature and dignity of women. They promote small groups and studies of different topics for women to help them discover who God called them to be. So tonight Mallory is going to talk about largely Humanae Vitae, of human life, this great encyclical from 1968. And it's wasn't well received back in the 60s, and certainly trying to promote it more now.
I think since St. Paul VI was canonized at the end of the Youth Synod, I think it's a time for the whole church and the whole world to look at that encyclical with fresh eyes. Right. Just like we can look at the gospel with fresh eyes, we can look at anything from the church's treasury of wisdom with fresh eyes, with new insight. Right.
So Mallory's a young married woman, has 2 children, and I just like her insights on it, and hopefully it'll speak to the culture today. We'd also like to show you a video put out by Endow, and it's a reflection on John Paul II's letter to women. So I hope you enjoy that.
Thank you, women who are mothers. You have sheltered human beings within yourselves in a unique experience of joy and travail. This experience makes you become God's own smile upon the newborn child, the one who guides your child's first steps, who helps it to grow, and who is the anchor as the child makes its way along the journey of life.
Thank you, women who are wives. You irrevocably join your future to that of your husbands in a relationship of mutual giving at the service of love and life.
Thank you, women who are daughters and women who are sisters, into the heart of the family and then of all society. You bring the richness of your sensitivity, your intuitiveness, your generosity, and fidelity.
Thank you, women who work. You are the present and active in every area of life: social, economic, cultural, artistic, and political. In this way, you make an indispensable contribution to the growth of a culture which unites reason and feeling, to a model of life ever open to the sense of mystery, to the establishment of economic and political structures ever more worthy of humanity.
Thank you, consecrated women, following the example of the greatest of women, the Mother of Jesus Christ. You opened yourself with obedience and fidelity to the gift of God's love. You help the church and all mankind to experience a spousal relationship to God.
Thank you, every woman, for the simple fact of being a woman. Through the insight which is so much a part of your womanhood, you enrich the world's understanding and help to make human relations more honest and authentic. To this great, immense feminine tradition, humanity owes a debt which can never be repaid.
Well, welcome, Mallory, to Life on the Rock.
Thanks for having me, Father Mark.
As we mentioned in the open, you are the Director of Program Growth for Endow, which is the education on the nature and dignity of women. And we wanted to have you on the show because we just, this past year, we had celebrated 50-year anniversary of Humanae Vitae. And I was struck by listening to some of your work about what you had to say about it. And I thought, too, the power of coming from a young woman about the church's teaching when the world doesn't really want to hear this teaching, does it?
No, it doesn't.
So you work with Endow, you all have materials promoting this. What's at the core of the message that you present to people about the church teaches on contraception?
Well, so we actually have a study that has the document in it. And so our study is Humanae Vitae. It has the document. And then we have commentary that was written that just explains what was Pope Paul VI trying to say. And so as I've kind of learned more about Humanae Vitae just in my own conversion, our core message is that for years, many faithful Catholics never read the document. And so what if in these years past where we've seen time come through, what if we actually opened it up and read what the church had to say about contraception, marriage, and family, and see if maybe they're right, maybe they had it right all along. And so we really just want women to open it up, read the words of Pope Paul VI, and then let it break open and learn how they can apply it to their lives.
Right. So the Latin phrase Humanae Vitae means of human life. It's written in 1968. Big controversy, especially in this country and the Western world. And what I liked about your story too is that you're from Houma, Louisiana, really southern Louisiana.
As south as the Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf of Mexico. And you went to LSU, and so you were formed in the culture in many ways. Born and raised Catholic, but you were steeped in the culture.
Yes.
Describe your thinking at that moment before you were converted on this issue.
I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought that the church had this old teaching that we shouldn't use contraception. I didn't really understand why. And it just seemed silly to me.
Right.
So being raised in South Louisiana, everybody's Catholic, but almost everybody also used contraception. So it was, I call it the rule of 2, and if you don't get your gender, number 3, right? And so that's what I saw, that's how I was raised. And whenever I came to know the Lord, I just never even thought about it. I thought, well, of course I'll use contraception. That's what everybody does.
Right, right. I was struck in your story about your openness to the truth, though, because you stumbled into a Janet Smith talk, and what happened there?
So I was in Florida, and I was still trying to trust the church. I had really come to know the Lord in this Protestant church that was incredible. I had wanted to leave the church for years out of just much bitterness that had built up in me. And so I had just decided to stay Catholic. I got involved in this youth group, and I'm listening to Janet Smith give these high school students a chastity talk. And I'm not really listening because I'm already bought into chastity.
Yeah.
And so, but at the end of it, she started talking about contraception and its effects on women, its effects on the family, and just kind of the history of contraception in the first place, and it really perked my ears. I'd never heard anybody talk about contraception the way she was. And I was telling you earlier that she was talking about this experiment they did with, I think, an atheist sociologist where he was injecting chimpanzees on an island with contraception, and they would stop mating with the women that they would inject, and then they injected all the women, and then they stopped mating with women altogether and started mating with each other, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So I went back to my apartment that night and Googled it because I wanted to make sure she wasn't lying to me. But just hearing that and making the connection of, okay, this is something that everybody uses, and we're somewhat in a mess when it comes to female-male relationships and just trying to figure out what it means to be human in the first place. I just started to connect the dots.
And I know, too, a strong point was in the encyclical about the prophetic part of it, where it talks about, I think, the 4 things about the objectification of women, and what were some of the others?
Yeah, so it was the government coercion of birth control on society, the objectification of women, the decrease of the general morality, and the skyrocket of divorce. And if we look at whenever Pope Paul VI wrote this in '68, and we just look at the test of time, all of them have happened. And so that was another thing. Janet Smith mentioned that. It was the first time I heard it. It's also talked about and broken out in our Endow study. It happened. It was definitely prophetic, and so the church was right.
Right. And certainly the pill, we often think of that as like the heart of the sexual revolution, promoting promiscuity and separating, right, the unitive and the procreative dimension. That the sexual gift is there to unite the couple and obviously to be procreative. Can you talk about that part of it, you know, how the church protects something so fundamentally human and natural?
Absolutely. So we were talking earlier about how you can decide to go on a diet, and you can say, I'm going to honor food because food has a purpose, right? Food has a purpose for nourishment, and food has a purpose for enjoyment. And so if you say, okay, well, I need to lose weight, you can say, I'm actually going to choose not to partake in these types of foods, which honors the purpose of that food, right? Or you can say, I'm going to eat this food and I'm going to throw it up. And so you're using that food for enjoyment, but you don't want the nourishment, which actually dishonors the purpose of food. Right. And so what the church is saying is that sex has a purpose. The purpose is unity, and the purpose is procreation. Right. So I'm meant to be unified to my spouse. I was reading something about how high the church esteems sex in the marital embrace. Yeah. They hold it up so high because it's so holy. And yet it's also for procreation, and so you want to honor both purposes. And so whenever you're looking at family planning, you can say, okay, for whatever reason, we shouldn't have a child right now, and so we're going to abstain at certain times. It still honors what sex is for, which means you're honoring your spouse as well, versus actually, I just want to use it for enjoyment. And so I'm going to cut off the procreative part, which really takes away the weight of it. That's something, honestly, when I got married, because we chose not to use contraception, I felt like sex had a weight that I didn't think it would have. Because there's a consequence to it, and that consequence is beautiful, but it also takes responsibility. And so it put it in a whole different category for me, where I think beforehand, from the culture, it was like, once you get married, do whatever you want, whenever you want. And that's not actually honoring the act or the person. Yeah.
And you can see like the logic of the church's teaching that is such a great and beautiful gift, that it does have so many rules. And they seem kind of severe and harsh, like the rules of even chastity within marriage, or that it's reserved for marriage, because it is such a powerful and beautiful thing. It's got to be in the context of marriage, otherwise it becomes destructive, right? We've seen that in our society. So.
Something I was reading through the catechism, or I was looking it up. I don't typically just read through the catechism, I wish I did, but I was looking at the catechism's definition of chastity, and if I can remember it right, it says the proper integration of sexuality into the human person. And I was blown away by that. It's so simple. Sex has a place in the human person, and it has to be properly integrated, or else it does cause destruction.
So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with Mallory to talk more about Humanae Vitae. You know, Mallory, what I love about that analogy, the food analogy, that it's gross, right, to throw the food up. It's like it's just something that's so wasteful and repulsive to eat just for the pleasure of eating and not to respect the nutritional value. And we all have a sense that that's not the purpose of it, you know, of eating. And yet we miss it with sexuality. And talk about, like, you're married now, you have 2 children, and using the church's teaching, has that of NFP at times, as you said, you know, serious reasons, how that has served to elevate the vision of marriage of the sexual act for you?
So the first part was when we did get married, it was like, we could have a baby. But we had decided, my husband and I, that we were going through so many transitions at the time, that we thought it would be great to wait 6 months to a year to have a child, which in the grand scheme of things isn't very long, but for us it was. And what I noticed, and at least looking back, is that because we were open to life and because we were using NFP, I had to think about it. And so we would go to Mass, and I would see these families with these beautiful babies, and it just showed me that my excuses weren't good enough. You know, one of them was, is it financial that we should wait to have a child? And okay, well, my grandparents had lots of children on almost nothing, and they all lived, right? And so, and I just didn't know if the idea of waiting for, wanting to put off another transition was a good enough reason. And so my husband and I talked about it, and we just decided that we would let whatever happened happen, and I got pregnant very quickly. And it was challenging, but it helped us connect that marriage and family are one. Like, they really are meant to be one. And so, and now, I mean, we have these 2 beautiful daughters, neither of them really planned, just kind of whenever. And they light up our house.
Yeah.
And so I think they challenge us to become holier, and they challenge us in that suffering, like the suffering is real, but they also bring so much joy that I don't think being steeped in the culture I knew was even possible. And I really look back on it. I think most of us, we grow up breathing in the secular culture without even choosing it.
Yeah.
And so I never truly saw myself as being like a wonderful mother. I saw myself as being a career person. But when, at the end of the day, those two little girls are what bring me the most joy. And watching my husband engage with them just
and grow as a father.
Absolutely. It's amazing.
I think that's so critical. You know, we need to do as Catholics in the culture to present a beautiful vision of marriage to inspire young people, because they're seeing other models that are more important about life. And you talk about that in like different worldviews, like Catholic worldview versus a secular worldview. What is at the heart of the difference between those two worldviews?
Well, so whenever I was in college, I wasn't living in any type of Catholic worldview. And what I don't think we always realize is that we have to see the world in some sort of light. And so we have to give something power in our lives because we know that we don't measure up. We know that there's a better version of ourselves somewhere out there that we want to be. And those things, we look to things to help us become that better version of ourselves. So, I mean, when I was in college or just not living in any type of faith life whatsoever, I looked to image, I looked to success, and I looked to having a good time, which was really in the end total freedom, right? Freedom to do whatever I wanted. And so those were the things that gave me power, or that I gave power, right? Could I have a good enough image that people liked me enough? Could I have enough success that people saw me as somebody of means or as of importance?
Right.
You know, and could those things bring me to a good time or have all this freedom? But what ends up happening is that we actually place God on the side and we don't realize that we can actually see the universe through his eyes. And so as I came to know my faith, I just started to have these moments that I realized that it was all real, that it was all true. I was 24. I've been raised Christian, raised Catholic, and I'm 24 and I'm going, Jesus rose in history. He's not a myth. It's not just a story. He actually rose in history. And so what does that mean? And so as I started to really understand that I could see the world through God's eyes, the purpose of things became different, right? And so marriage wasn't necessarily about becoming happy or having this person fulfill me all the way.
Right.
And life wasn't about constantly being serving to me. It was about serving God in everything that I do. And I think that in of itself can open us up to a self-gift understanding of the world, which I think naturally opens us up to just the ebbs and flows of family life. Right.
Yeah, if we push God to the side, it becomes very self-centered. And that pursuit of the job at all costs and making more money can feed that kind of selfish.
And anything that inhibits that becomes a bad thing that we have to get rid of.
Right. You also work in promoting the vocation of women. Can you give us a couple of thoughts there about maybe it would help a young woman watching this and something she's not hearing from the secular world about her vocation?
So in John Paul II's letter to women, I think he sums it up really well. He talks about the feminine genius, women, that we have a unique gift to be receptive, to be motherly, to nurture. But one thing that he says that really just brought it home for me was that women see the human person. And so women have the innate ability to see and care for the human person in a way that images God that isn't necessarily natural for men. So it's not that they can never overlap, but it's just not as natural. And so young children, little girls will draw faces if you give them a pen and paper, but little boys will draw action. And so they image God in a different way that can maybe drive something forward, whereas when we'll say, okay, are we being utilitarian about this? How can we be more hospitable? How can we honor the people there? And so when John Paul II talks about the vocation of woman, when the church speaks to that, it's about lifting up all of humanity, and women have an innate ability to do that.
To make sure that everybody's lifted up.
Right.
And to speak into that. You know, another part of your story that I absolutely love is, maybe you could share this quote if you're willing. You were praying in an adoration chapel, kind of wrestling with staying in the Protestant church or coming back to Catholicism, and you heard a voice. Tell us what the voice told you.
So I was in the Protestant church for a while, very much wanting to leave the Catholic Church, and on a whim, just in my heart, I decided to go to adoration. I wasn't involved in the church at all. And after adoration, I was sitting in my car, and I was just praying, and I said, Lord, I'm so in love with you. I would do anything for you, anything. I would go anywhere, but I can't do it one foot in, one foot out. I can't be split between the Protestants and the Catholics. I have to choose. And what I heard at that moment was, I've raised you in this church. Many of my people do not know me, so I've given you a mission field. Why are you looking for a different one? And yeah, it was pretty audible, honestly. It was so powerful that at that moment I decided out of obedience that I would continue to stay Catholic. Yeah,
I love that. We have a great mission field. You've been faithful to it. You're a Focus missionary, work for Focus now with Endow. So thanks for all your good work, Mallory Smyth. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you, Father Mark.
Well, we now have our Into the Vineyard Challenge section of the show, and we should say on that Endow video we showed earlier, that was a direct quotation from John Paul II's letter to women, a beautiful litany of thank yous of women in different vocations in life.
Yeah, isn't his words powerful? And there's something very powerful about, now that he has passed on to eternal life and is a canonized saint, there's something very powerful about those words. We've heard those words over and over again, but now I think they have more weight to them.
Yeah, I especially like that quote where it said, you know, just for your being and your insight, and how that just comes out of that, your insight that makes life more authentic or more humane. I think as Mallory said tonight as well, that women's vision of things, the way they perceive things, is a much needed voice in the world today. And it's a combination of complementary, gifts that men and women bring. And so women very much are needed. We need a great renewal right now, struggling in the culture and the church. So, but tonight we were talking about Humanae Vitae, on human life. The 50th anniversary was last year. And our Into the Vineyard challenge this week will be to
just read the encyclical. Simply read Humanae Vitae, on human life. You can get it from EWTN website. You can go just type in on human life and just read it. Read it for yourself. Read it through fresh eyes, like Mallory said, through God-centered eyes, the eyes of faith.
Right. I mean, our culture out now rejects the church's teaching about contraception, but there's real reasons. You know, it's actually part of the natural law, what the church teaches. So there's a reasoned explanation for why the church teaches what she does. You know, it serves to unite the spouses, and it certainly serves the procreative purposes of marriage. And it helps to, we didn't really talk about much, but it fosters greater intimacy in the marriage. Yes. You know, to use, if, we're going to space out births, NFP, that, the couple converses, talks about things.
Well, communication. Communication. 75% of any good conversation is listening and communicating. So communication is so key in a relationship, especially within marriage.
Right. And I like what she said too about it. It gave like a greater depth or even gravity to marriage itself and to the conjugal act, that it can bring forth life. You're cooperating with God in this moment.
Yeah,
so it's precious.
Co-creators with God.
Yeah. So that's our challenge. Read the encyclical and meditate upon it, reflect on it, and see God's wisdom in it. So we'll send you into that vineyard with a blessing. May our Heavenly Father shine His face upon you. May He give you His peace. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week on Life on the Rock.
In the silence surrounding me, in the stillness, I hear whispering in the wreckage of all my misery. You are faithful.